Welcome, everybody. We are live. Hope you're having a good day. So, a bit of a change of pace. I want to go back to talking about research techniques and artificial intelligence because I do think that the world is in the midst of a massive transformation, whether we like it or not. And I do think there are some good aspects and some bad aspects, a lot of bad aspects. But there's a silver lining, and I just don't see any benefit of just putting our heads in the sand like so many people want to do and just ignoring one of the most transformative technologies in our lifetime that's popping up. And unfortunately, mostly due to the wealth discrepancies between these evil corporations, the evil oligarchs, versus the good people of the world, so oftentimes technology is wielded disproportionately, and so that's the big problem that I see. Also, it enables the evil powers to be gatekeepers and to train their models with the information they want people to believe and they want people to be exposed to, and not train it with what they don't want people to be exposed to. Or train, I'm sure they're training their own models behind the scenes in such a way that they can have the real knowledge, which they've covered up with lies, to themselves. So there's a lot of problems out there, and we'll talk about some of them today. But there's also some really powerful new tools that we have, and I just don't see, from a game theory perspective, any benefit from our side, the good side, saying, "Oh no, we're just going to shun this entirely. We're not going to use it. We're not going to understand it, and we're just going to let the other side run rampant with it." Like, that's like the worst strategy we can do at this point, because they're going to use it. All signs point to them continuing to use this. And so I've been behind the scenes doing a lot of work trying to figure out what this stuff does, trying to figure out how we can use it, and building tools around it to facilitate our use of it. And there's some existing tools that have been around for a long time that I just want to remind people exist, such as PostgreSQL for databases, JavaScript and HTML and jQuery, and PHP. This is like the bread and butter of the internet. And there's so much that we can accomplish with simple applications that run off databases. And with the artificial intelligence, and it's not just like the ChatGPTs and the Llama 3s and the Claude, the Anthropic Claude offerings. There's also things like BERT and other open source offerings. I really like BERT. We're going to talk about that a little bit today again. It helps us go through huge lists of text items and put them in different buckets. And I made a video about this the other day, and even since that video was published, I've had a number of revelations about how we can use that even more to our benefit. So let's dive in here. There's a lot that I want to cover, and it's a little bit out of order and disjoint, but bear with me. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat. I want to interact with the chat. Also, we'll be doing more and more live streams on my alternative YouTube channel, trying to get more people over there. So if you want to check that out, just search Tim Truth Group Discover on YouTube. Outlaw in the chat says we need to use it, not let it use us. Exactly. And interestingly, I think we need to understand the weapons in order to defend ourselves against them. And the same can be applied to psychology, which I'm also researching and trying to apply these tools to level up my understanding of psychology, because these things are very much weaponized against us. Artificial intelligence and neural networks are going to be very much weaponized against us. And if people don't understand their capabilities and are just scrolling through like on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and just taking it all in, you don't understand at how much of a disadvantage you're putting yourself. And I do it from time to time as well, but I try to be very conscientious about what I'm looking at, because I think a lot of people don't understand what they're looking at. If you know what you're looking at and you know that they're using advanced AI algorithms to try to mislead you, you can actually get so much more out of scrolling through Twitter, because you can be like, wait, why is this person popping up on my feed? There's there's a reason why everything's popping up on your feed. And why is this video popping up on my YouTube? And if you're on the defensive, and if you can actually be analytical and understand and be ahead of the algorithm, a lot of times these algorithms aren't good enough to just completely destroy all of our discernment. Now, into the future, will they get better and better and more personalized? And can they find exploits even on people like myself who, when something pops up in my feed for Twitter, I'm like, oh, okay, this person's bringing up a good point about some product they really want to push on us, right? But let me search their account for some other keywords. Oh, look, boom, that's why they're pushing them, because they're just pushing these other poisons, right? So let's just dive into the tools though, because this is a really interesting development. ChatGPT just put out a new model at half the price of their prior model. They're calling it ChatGPT 4o. And so this is very interesting. I heard some speculation that I just can't shake from my mind that I think is probably correct. Some people are thinking that this is the smallest model of their new batch. So for example, Facebook just released their, and I'm probably going to get these numbers of parameters wrong. I think it was, I can't even remember. Let's say 7 billion for their smallest model, then 70 billion for their next largest model. Parameters. So these are all the little knobs and dials, you can think of them. These little settings that are trained in order to generate text. But they say that they're still training their 400 billion parameter model, and to expect that soon. And this is something that we keep seeing. For example, Claude had 3 models as well. What was it? Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus were the 3 names. Well, some people are thinking that this new development from OpenAI is like their smallest of their new models, but it's already like on par, in some areas a little bit better, and half the cost of their prior model, ChatGPT 4. And so there was a little bit of a mystery around this because they let this out into the wild. They have these so-called arenas. Like this arena here is called limsys.org. And basically these models go toe-to-toe, and people can prompt them. Just average users help them gauge the power of these things. So the user will put a prompt in, and then they'll see a side-by-side comparison. Model A on the left, Model B on the right. And then they'll say, okay, I like Model A. Model A wins. And then, based on that, just like, chess competitions or whatever, they score the ELO. I'm curious, what does ELO stand for, besides Electric Light Orchestra? ELO rating system is a method for calculating the relative skill of players in zero-sum games such as chess. Oh, it's named after its creator, Arpid Elo. That's interesting. Okay, so it's named after somebody's last name. So basically, just like in chess competitions, you can see who's the best model, or who's the best player. And so these popped up on the scene, and people were like, what is this? It says it's from OpenAI, but it's called Chat2-Chatbot, or excuse me, GPT-2-Chatbot. And then I'm a good GPT-2 chatbot, and then I'm also a good GPT-2 chatbot. So it was, looking back in hindsight, now that we know that GPT-4o is the public version that's now available, they were kind of playing this out and seeing how well it would do against the competition and against their prior models. I'd imagine they'd have some way of benchmarking this internally. But long story short, they put out this new model called ChatGPT 4 Omni, which is half the price if we go to the pricing sheet here, as far as the API goes. When you're accessing it via the chat interface, chatgpt.com, I guess is their new way to access it. This is what I read. So if you're a Plus user, which is $20 a month, which I am, by the way, I think if you use it a lot, you can get a lot of value out of it, especially for things like writing or coding. But the API is a separate animal. So it says Plus users will be able to send up to 80 messages every 3 hours on GPT-4o, and up to 40 messages every 3 hours on GPT-4. So this used to be a pretty big bottleneck here, 40 messages every 3 hours on GPT-4. So I've hit that numerous times. And now there's this other pretty amazing model that you get another 80 messages during those 3 hours. So in a way, the price went down, 67% just through the chat interface. So the $20 a month is now a much better deal. And they do say, though, they may reduce the limit during peak hours. And so something else they did to try to reduce the number of requests and the number of processing and the compute they have to do is they gave this discount for batch operations. So a batch operation is something that you just have a bunch of items that you want to have computed. And in this case, you don't need it done immediately. So according to the documentation, they say it might take up to 24 hours to get the responses, but it's half price. So this is pretty amazing, especially when you combine these two things. Now we have GPT-4o, which I don't know exactly. It just came out, and I certainly haven't done the amount of benchmarking that's required to be able to say this type of stuff. But there's reason to believe that it might be better at things like OCR, which is something that I'm really looking at, like transcribing a lot of old reference books into text format in a way that I can use them. And then maybe even doing text-to-speech and turning it into videos and publishing them, for example, for out-of-copyright stuff. And I'll talk a little bit about where we can find so much material that we can now process, either just manually by reading it, taking notes, doing research, or using these new tools to help us automate and streamline the process. But you can see $5 per million tokens for the input, $15 per million tokens for the output. Compare this to the other model, twice the cost, 10 and 30 respectively. And then there's the additional pricing for if you send an image along. So for example, I have this page here, book importer, where I can select a book, pick one of these Latin dictionaries. So I have this Latin dictionary. Let's load this up. Basically, the way that this page works is that it allows me to cut up and crop out all of the different columns. So I could already tell from that random page we were looking at that the bulk of this reference book has 3 columns per page. It's a very common format for printing because you can cram a lot more information in by using multiple columns. And so sometimes you'll see 2 columns, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, rarely 4. But it was a common problem that I kept bumping up against. And I'm like, okay, I've got to build something that allows me to extract these columns in a really streamlined fashion. And then I can run them through whatever I want to for the OCR. So for example, there's Textract from Amazon if you're just strictly in English. And that's pretty cheap, decent quality. But where things like ChatGPT 4 and 4.0 really shine is with things like this, where you have like Greek letters mixed in sometimes. If you have like this, I don't see too much Greek, but I'm sure there'll be Greek in here. Especially when the etymology relates to Greek, obviously. But so if we scroll down here, what I can do is just you can see I'm just basically selecting the 3 columns. I need to make it better where it does the auto update, just because I should have. Technically, I just updated all these pages, but I need to make it more responsive. I'll open it up in a new tab here. You can see all the pages have been updated. But I can also change this tool up here from modify. So all of these are using the same rule. Rule 1 for all the pages. But I can also click this up here, and then whenever I drag it now, it's going to make that page unique. And then all the other ones will stay the same. So I was just trying to come up with the most streamlined way that I could crop out all these columns and then process them. And so then when, long story short, when this came out and they said, oh look, 50% off if you use Batch API. Like that's a game changer for me because that just cut my operational cost in half. And then the next announcement just a couple days later, GPT-4o came out and many people are saying this is better at OCR. And then it's also half the cost. So the cost went down 75%. for this type of work. So I'm glad I held off on, and it might actually be better quality. Look at this. This is interesting. GPT-4o is truly remarkable on 18th handwriting. Not sure what that means. It says generative history. I gave it the following letter and asked it for a transcription. A couple of very minor errors. That's really incredible. Okay, from the 1800, January 1800, cursive. And then now it's typed out in, obviously it was in English before, but now it's typed out. You could paste this into a text-to-speech voice synthesis engine, have it read to you. So that's really amazing, especially with tools like Anna's Archive, which lets us find these old books. And there's so much amazing information in old books. I think they've done a number on humanity by getting people to turn away from the wealth of information in old books. Now, certainly there's a lot of deception, lies, manipulation, propaganda in old books. It was like television of the day, right? So you have to look at everything with the level of distrust. I got a question the other day that was like, Tim, you pulled up ChatGPT to ask it about detoxification systems and how urine detoxes in the human body. Why do you trust ChatGPT? And I don't trust ChatGPT, to be honest. But I know from all my different options, because I use all these every day. I use Wikipedia, I use Google, I use Anna's Archive, I use Sci-Hub, and Anna's Archive has a Sci-Hub-like thing called SciDB for looking up papers. I just know the relative value of these things and that you can actually get pretty good summaries using ChatGPT for a specific question in a certain realm of experience. Like there's a lot of questions I wouldn't ask ChatGPT to answer because I don't really care what it has to say. But if I just need a good summary of like the prevailing medical explanation, it's pretty good. And it'll answer in the context of your question, which I find very helpful. So what's amazing though is these different benchmarks are showing it to be much faster, much cheaper, this new GPT-4o model. And what I'm thinking is, what if this is just like the smallest of their next batch of models? Like they said, I heard they said at the end of their announcement just a few days ago when they released 4o, or 4o. They said, stay tuned because we'll be releasing more models soon. And so also we're waiting on Facebook to put out its 400 billion parameter model, which is so-called open source, although there's some caveats. So things are changing rapidly. Even if the models don't get progressively better, which I expect them to, once the world catches up and starts implementing this all over the board, everything's going to change. Everything's going to get smarter in many, many respects. All the websites you use, all the, let's just stick with websites you use. They're all going to be super powered to some extent with these new AI tools. So I just want to remind people about Anna's Archive. Just it's annas-archive.org if you're ever trying to find a PDF or an old book. It's a great place to look. Also, Sci-Hub if you're looking for a paper. Great place to look. And just for an example of, there's just so much value you can pull out from ChatGPT, just like doing searches on Google. Although Google's getting worse and worse by the minute, probably because they're pushing people over to AI. So it might be a very small window where we can actually extract really useful information from AI, especially in certain realms. But I'm always amazed using it like as an assistant for writing code. Like it can really knock a lot of stuff out of the park. And you use it enough writing code, and it's like, wow, this thing really understands and can really just jump in and be helpful. So for example, I'm writing a book on basically how minds are controlled so we can be defensive against manipulators. And I was just looking up studies for these different phenomenons that I've identified For example, there's the attractiveness effect amidst a litany of various kind of mental failings that humans have. For some reason, humans will believe somebody who's attractive just because they're more attractive. And so, hence why you see what you see when you turn on Fox News or CNN. A lot of times they'll just pick somebody because they're attractive, because they sound confident, and that was the other one. So I have this search here. I'm looking, what studies can I explore that demonstrate the persuasive power of the attractiveness effect? And I put a little blurb from this book I'm writing. And then I also asked it about basically the con man effect, the persuasive power of confidence. And I just asked for papers that I could look up. And it gave me a number of papers, which I hadn't heard before. Studies by Tenney, Spellman, and McCowan, 2008, show that people tend to believe those who express confidence in their beliefs, regardless of the actual accuracy of these statements. So it's a really great research tool if you're trying to flesh things out and try to find studies that help you explain something. Because I really like, rather than just telling somebody, hey, this is a phenomenon. It's like, okay, look at these studies. This is the control. This is the experimental variable. Here's how many people they studied this on. Here was the experimental design. Here are the results. I find that to be a much better way to convey these phenomenons, for example. So really interesting that we can actually find these old papers. We can find books. We can, in addition to searching Google, we can also search using ChatGPT. And I think we should. We should use all the tools we have at our disposal. So just finishing this thought here, the Batch API, 50% off, which is good if you have a lot of things that you need to get done. And if you have a huge list of items, there's really no benefit of going one by one through the chat interface anyway. And there's no reason why you can't wait a day. Even though I think most of the time it's much quicker than a day. But they basically say they reserve the right to take up to 24 hours. So it helps them kind of smooth out the demand. So they don't have to, at any one point in time, if they get a billion requests all at once, they don't have to tell people right away what the answers are. They can wait till it dies down a little bit. Here's a little example of me using Anna's archive. I just want to show some power use tools here, or some tricks of the trade here. So just a couple of books I was trying to download. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So you just do a search and you put the title in the box. One of my favorite tools, and thank you to whoever showed me this when we were on a stream. I'm sure most people know about the right-click, open a new tab. But you can also do that just by clicking down the mouse wheel on a link. So that's a great tool. So I usually just scroll down here and I click with my mouse wheel anything that looks interesting. So I just load them up. You can see along the top there. This is a screen recording. And let me know if anybody has any questions in the chat. Somebody says, I had ChatGPT write a eulogy for my grandmother. It was a very fast way to have a very impactful speech writing. It was too easy. Yeah, it's always good to personalize that kind of thing, I would think, but if you can tell it, some stories that you'd like to bring up, you can give it a lot of guidance. And what's really important when you're doing writing or coding with ChatGPT is be very picky, and you can always ask for revisions. Be like, oh, that's pretty good, but I'd really like to make it more emotional. Just don't settle for the first thing it gives you. Just keep asking for iterations and iterations, and be very picky. That's my advice. But it can really help us in a lot of ways. See if there's any other questions. Let me know in the chat if anybody has any questions. Outlaw says, I have learned you have to ask questions in different ways to get real information. Yes, it's all about how you ask the question, what you ask. And you can't just expect it to read your mind. And there's also, let me go to this. There's a couple of important tools that or techniques that I'd recommend if you're on ChatGPT. So there's two ways that you can go about something if you don't like the response. You can do a follow-up, and you can say, like, I've already heard of those. Can you give me 10 more? For example. Or if it's a way off base, sometimes it's better just to come back up here, hit the edit button, and try to put enough more clarification in there as possible so it would never answer in the same way it did. Because you'll use up fewer messages. Technically, I think it might actually start doubling up. So if you're working on a really long thread with a lot of back and forth, and you ask another question, you have to, in a way, at least according to their API usage, it might actually start counting that as much more usage than going and starting a new request, starting a new conversation. So you can eat up through the allotted number faster. But I mean, it's a good way to find some channels, some threads to pull at, some information to pursue. So I'm trying to make this somewhat organized here. All right. So another great tool is called PostgreSQL. This is free, open source database. Really amazing. So if you have a computer, be it Mac, Windows, Linux, it's like spreadsheets on steroids. That's how I look at it. So spreadsheets are a great tool. I'm not knocking spreadsheets. But if you need millions of rows, if you need to have it plug into, say, a nice app interface where you can edit things and search through it, do mass deletions, that kind of thing, databases are a great way to go. And ChatGPT allows us now to quickly draft database designs. You can ask it to kind of coach you through setting up PostgreSQL for the first time. It's really easy to learn once you just do one or two goes at it. But then another great tool that I like is called PHP. This is what's called a server-side tool, scripting language, as opposed to something that runs in the browser like JavaScript or jQuery, HTML. So PHP is what I recommend to people who are just getting started, want to make a website that's dynamic, that you can type something in and it'll remember it. So PHP is a great tool. So for example, these are some tools that I'm making with these exact technologies. This is a page that I'm dreaming up here and building out, trying to use all these new tools. And it's taken me a bit longer than I would have liked because they announced things like, oh, you can save 50% if you use batches. And I'm like, I'm certainly going to use batches, save 50%. So what this lets me do is I can import data, for example. So if I have a CSV, I can just drag and drop it here. I can copy paste it here. And I can just import into a new database. And then once I have things in my database, I can, for example, do bulk AI job. So this data set right here is the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Really qualified experts saying the official explanation makes no sense. We need a new investigation. And if we can't get it, we need to wake the public up to this monstrosity that happened before all of our eyes. And so what we can do here is I could be like, summarize this expert's testimony. And so I'm just talking in like think about it like on a record per record basis, because this is going to run for each record. So I could say, summarize this expert's testimony, and I can do a new line. I can use this field here in curly braces is the placeholder format. So you can see down here the preview. Summarize this expert's testimony. From reviewing the videos and listening to interviews of the 9/11, I feel it's highly likely that the collapses were caused by demolition explosives. And then I could add here, let's put the signature here. So first, space, last, So that's Kenneth Smith right there. And then I could say, let's put additional professional info. And then you can say degreed and licensed architect. And let's try this. Try this prompt. So it used GPT-4. Kenneth Smith, a licensed architect with a Bachelor of Architecture, testified that after reviewing videos and listening to interviews related to the 9/11 attacks, he believes the collapse of the buildings was most likely caused by demolition explosives. And so I'm really just streamlining my whole process here, because I would never want to fire something off that's going to run 3,256 times through something that's going to charge me not a trivial amount, right? $10 per million tokens input, 30 per million token output. Then their new model here, half that price, which is good. And then if I can use the batching, which I hope to, 50% off, right? So, and I will be releasing this, so all you can use this as well. So also like image generation, the same thing with the placeholders. All of our rows can be turned into images in a predefined format. I can also click here, random, and see all the different variations, right? All the different records as they are fed into this template with the placeholders. Kind of like mail merge. So then I can make a new field, say summary, and then click run for all records. And so I've done a little bit of this just in experimentation. I've showed this in the past. For example, I've asked for quotes pertaining to controlled demolition. Here's a summary field that I did before. A new thing that I've added, and this was something that I released on Substack to subscribers over there, is BERT classification. Because initially I was like, well, I was basically trying to do this with ChatGPT and the like. There's much cheaper versions of AI out there, and I'm hoping that these free or really cheap alternatives, open source alternatives, get better and better, and I'm sure they will. But there is always kind of a premium of using the best model, at least until these others reach a satisfactory stage. But like you can see here, related to controlled demo, this is a field that I made where I was basically trying to take the statement, which is right here, this is what I started with, and I was trying to put things into different buckets. Like, okay, is this expert talking about controlled demolition? Because, say I want to make a video saying, look at all these experts saying that 9/11 was very possibly or probably a controlled demolition. It'd be nice if I could, instead of having to read through 3,200 records, just get a list of the best results. So that's where BERT comes in from Google and AI Text Classify. So this is a new tool I made. So I could do related to control demo. And then I could put the template in here. So it'd just be statement underscore 9/11. And I could try out a couple of random. So it looks good. I could say yes, oops, yes or no. And then the idea is, let's just click start here. Okay, save successful. So now we have this classify. So let me refresh. I'm trying to make this all more responsive and seamless, but sometimes I have to refresh until we get there. But now we have this new drop-down box. So when I click on the drop-down box, is it not going to work for me? Okay, there we go. So you can see I haven't made a decision yet, or I could pick yes or no. So the way I did this is I have basically two new database fields in my Postgre table. Again, PostgreSQL is a database, it's free and open source, and it's like a spreadsheet on steroids. So I can go through here and at least on a couple of them, or as many as I want to do initially, I do what's called manual labeling. That's what they call it in BERT speak. So this one is yes, related to controlled demolition, because it says down here, Well, quote, all elements characteristic of a controlled demolition. So that's a yes. Or I could scroll down to here. This just says suspicious. Too many unanswered questions. So I'd say, no, it's not really related. Not what I'm looking for. And so if I do enough of these, then I can run a model, or I can train a model. And then I can run that model on all the other ones that I haven't manually labeled. And I can guess a probability of, is it, basically it'll tell me like, okay, it's an 85% chance it's a yes. 15% chance it's a no. And this is a big revelation I had after I put my last video out. When I initially launched on Substack for supporters, the code that people can download and run with Python. Let me show you some of that, because I had some revelations after I published that. So this is where I was starting. And this is like something that you can just export from Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel or whatever spreadsheet you're using, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, whatever. You can just make a spreadsheet with all your text and then the labels. So in this case, is it of interest? So this is a separate classification challenge where I want to be able to, if I have a list of books, and I've got a number of big lists of books, this is just the training data that I'm trying to train it, my preferences. But I wanted to be able to save me a bunch of time, go through millions or billions of books, and tell me, oh, these are the ones you should check out, Tim. So first you have to train it. So that's what these 139 rows do. And basically what I'm saying here is I'm interested in history and etymology. And then I pick some other topics like computing. No, I'm not interested. Hydroponics. No, I'm not interested. Just for the sake of this. I'm not saying these aren't interesting topics. Gardening, not interested. Galaxy formation theories, not interested. So this is enough for it to learn and to be able to start guessing. And there's this, what's the term? Best practice for training a model is you don't want to train it on all the data that you have labeled. A good rule of thumb is maybe pick 80%. Train it on the first 80% of data, and then save that last 20% so that you can test and see, okay, how well does it do? How well does it do on data that it hasn't seen before? And now my idea here is, on this page, what if I have a way that's even better? Because I'm just trying to think of how that would even work if you have just spreadsheets everywhere. It's getting confusing. It's like, okay, I've got to bring some of those records over to my training data once I've identified some more that might be useful to train the model. I wanted to just put this all into a really streamlined format. So I could just go through here and I'll see yes or no. So the first time I go through here, I'm just trying to give it enough to sink its teeth in. Then I hit run the first time, train the model. Okay, now make predictions for everything. So I have two different fields in my database, one for the manually selected, which I consider a higher quality, and another field for basically the latest and the greatest model and what it predicts for each. And if there's a manually selected, it's always going to go off that. But then I can go through after it runs the first time and it guesses for everything in my list, be it a list of books or a list of side effects for certain products that are being pushed on us, or a list of architects and engineers quotes on 9/11 or whatever my data source is. Or say I have a really long textbook that I'm trying to find interesting stuff and search for interesting stuff on a certain topic. Right? There's a lot of these different text classification issues that can really save me a lot of time and make my research much higher quality. So after I do the first round of running the model, making predictions for all of the things that I haven't manually selected, I can scroll through, and if I find anything that's wrong, I can just change it. See what this one is. This says, it appears there's more to the story than simply the planes made the Twin Towers fall. So just for the sake of how I want this to work, I'll say no, right? Or maybe it said no and I want to say, oh, let's call that a yes. That's enough for it to be a yes. So what's interesting though is to get to the revelations that I made after posting my last video and the code. This has since been updated on Substack, by the way. So if you downloaded the initial code on Substack, go check it out again, because I've put some new code. I updated it. I have both the original download, which was enhanced a little bit already, and I have a whole new enhanced version. So basically, trying to think of there's a lot I need to say here. So initially I just had this predict label. So you give it some text based on, and you load up the model that you trained, and then you give it some more text and you tell me, okay, which class does this get? Yes or no? Or it could have more than 2 classes, by the way. So that was cool. When I first saw this, I'm like, this is a game changer. But then I realized that it doesn't stop there. It keeps getting cooler and cooler. So then I found that I can also predict with confidences. So in addition to it telling me, okay, I think yes, this is controlled demolition, it could say, I'm giving it a 95% yes, 5% no. And then that's something that's interesting as well, because then I can sort, okay, show me the most confident controlled demolition quotes that you have. Or I can even go to the gray zone right around 50-50 and go through and manually select those. So there's a lot of information that we can leverage here. And then I was thinking, okay, what if I wanted to score something based on, so for example, the interest question, how interesting it is. What if I had, say, the data like this? So instead of title, subject, interest, where interest is just a label, yes or no, what if I broke this out into percentages? So for deep learning, let's say 100% no. For history of Europe, let's say 75% yes. For etymology English dictionary, at least for this example, 100% yes. And I go through that for the whole list. Well, I found that I can train a model based on this information. And then it's going to be even better at making predictions, hopefully. And then as far as, let me see if I can find this. So in terms of neural networks, this is also interesting because before I was thinking, okay, well, say I have a numerical value. Let's say I classified something. So I'm trying to think of what a good example would be here. Architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. Let's say I have a yes or no if they're a credentialed expert. And I want to use that to help me decide if I want to include their quote in my documentary or not. Presumably, if they're a credentialed expert whose credentials look really good, their testimony is going to be stronger and is going to help wake people up better. So that could be a numerical value, just 1 or 0 that comes into here. But before I was thinking, okay, well, I could basically just send a value here to this input node if I deem it to be relevant to controlled demolition from the BERT classification, and 0 into this, or vice versa. If it's not relevant to controlled demolition, I'd send a 0 to this first node and a 1 down to here. That's what's called one-hot encoding in machine learning. So instead of trying to do something like binary, where you can use any of these digits in tandem with each other. So for example, if we have 3 of these nodes, if you're doing a binary type encoding, you could represent 7 different values. Actually 8 different values. But if you're doing one-hot encoding, you can just do 7. Excuse me. Let me say that differently because that's wrong. You would need more of these input nodes, but it works much better for these neural networks, from what I'm told, to do one-hot encoding. But we can improve this even better with what we have here. So for example, here's some output from my new and improved code available on Substack if you want to support the channel and get some awesome code at the same time. So now when I go through the book list, it's telling me what its guesses are in terms of the numbers. And actually, this works in a number of different ways. You could actually do this before without having to say, see how I broke this down into yes or no and the different percentages for each of those, which allows me to fine tune it even more than just picking more and more buckets, more and more classes. But you could do this as well for something like this, where I just have the label. One of two of the label options for each of the rows. No, I'm not interested. Yes, I am interested. You could still do something like this, but now what I'm seeing is this would be the best way to feed this into a neural network. Instead of doing one hot encoding, where you just send whichever the selected value is a 1 and the other one is 0. Well, this is actually a much better way, because if you see let's see if we can find an example where it's more unknown. This might be the best we get. This is, so for Old Norse religion, history and Norse are the subjects. It's saying there's this 18% chance that I will not be interested, and an 82% chance that I will be interested. Well, I could feed those into the neural network as we're training it. And when we're executing and trying to predict values, what comes out the other side. So I think this is a much better way to do it, because it takes into account the confidence levels and the ones that I'm obviously going to be super interested in versus the ones that are kind of on the fence. So I'm still trying to combine the two, BERT and the neural networks. But for starting, I just want to get let's find where we left off. I just want to get text classification to help me massively and very quickly decide for each item in my list, which might be a huge list of millions or billions of items, which bucket to put it in. So I'm really excited about that technology. And again, let me know if anybody has any questions in the chat. I don't want to ramble on too long. We're going to keep this short and sweet today, but just wanted to keep everybody appraised with what I'm finding out there. So it's interesting too, with the batch for OpenAI, they do support a number of different models. So they have their vision models, so we can do things like, oh, this is actually interesting. According to this, I don't see GPT-4o. Maybe they just haven't updated this yet. Actually, no, it's right at the top. GPT-4o, their new model, is available from the batch for the 50% discount. And it was already 50% discounted, as this new model's pricing shows us. So what's cool, though, is you can see they have their embedding models here. So the best model from OpenAI's embedding category is text embedding 3 large. And embedding is a very interesting thing that allows you to feed text into a neural network like this, whereby it'll give you, I forgot the number, like 3,000 different features, numerical features that represent the text to some degree. And the whole point is you can plug that into a neural network. And that's how a lot of these new models, these text generation models, work. And also what's cool, I've shown this before, but just to remind, it also allows us to see how similar text is in terms of its semantic meaning, as I've demonstrated here on this little demo using Rigveda hymns. And then what's really cool is you can do something called dimensionality reduction. Dimensionality reduction. And the way it works is, initially, if you take the embedding from ChatGPT, you have like 3,000 dimensions, because there are 3,000 features in a big list. Let me see if I can just show you this. It's not what I wanted. Firing off a lot of embeddings, but not the one I was trying to find here. Here we go. So if I take some text, for example, let's take this introduction to one-hot encoding. Drop this in, and I'll embed it using the largest from OpenAI. We can open this in our DevTools and get the length of it. 3072. So each of these is called a feature. And it's called a text embedding because it's embedding text into these inputs of a neural network. So you need 3072 of these input nodes on the left. So the flow of data, as we've covered before, comes from the left to the right. And so we need 3072 input nodes to take each of these features from the text. But what's cool about the way that OpenAI does it, and some other models as well, is they put the most important features first. So if you have, let's say, 1 million of these 3072 featured text embeddings, you could lob off and chop off the last 2,000 of them, say, taking you from 3 billion down to just 1 billion, which would allow you to do a lot more complex mathematical computations, etc. Then there's this other one. I don't know if it'll work right now for me. Let's try it. Yeah, it does work. I'm using Ollama on my computer here. Ollama allows you to run a whole plethora of different AI models locally on your own computer, making it, I wouldn't say free, but I mean, it's kind of free, except for, these big models will kind of use up all your compute and you'll start spinning your wheels and everything will get kind of bogged down. So there's a value definitely just outsourcing it to some company and just using their servers to do your heavy lifting. But I mean, this is probably the way that I would do all my embedding, using Ollama, MXB AI. Now, I'm sure OpenAI will continue to put out more embedding models, and I'm sure these open source ones will continue to get better and better. But let's see how long the MXB AI, because this one is actually better. And it only has, like, I think 1,024 features. But my point is, you can look at these as dimensions. So if we go to my charting, here we go. This is using OpenAI's large embedding model. So 3,000, whatever the number was, 3,000 dimensions, but then it reduces it down to 2 dimensions. So we can look at it on just an XY plot. And if I click this button up here, it's going to go to 3 dimensions, which I think is pretty cool. And then you can see the color coding is also a very interesting aspect here. And the way this works is that we're grouping it into a certain number of clusters using a pretty cool algorithm called k-means clusters. And what's cool about k-means is that we can visualize what happens if we use more and more clusters. How well does it fit the data? So if we just have one cluster, or let's start with 2 clusters, it doesn't fit the data nearly as well. You can see right up here, the SSD, which is some measurement of fit. I don't remember what it stands for. But you can see as we increase the number of clusters, it fits better and better, and this decreases. This is called an elbow chart. And what's cool about the elbow chart is we can pick kind of the smallest amount of clusters as possible that competes with using much larger numbers of clusters. So for example, let's say 8 here is very interesting. That's the elbow. If we go to 8, this isn't too far off from using, say, 20 clusters. So there might actually be a benefit for doing 20 different clusters. But kind of depends on what we're trying to do. But now the next step that I think would be very interesting is to take all these for each of the colors and then to pass it into some sort of a summarization algorithm, which I'm working on as well. For example, I mean, it's kind of a silly, well, not a silly example, but I'm trying to start with something small that's not going to use up all my credits. So I had ChatGPT write me this data set, which just takes, it's basically different points of view of a car crash. And it gives me a testimony. So Ashley says, I saw the blue car speeding before it hit the red truck at the intersection. Gerald says, I didn't see the crash happen, but I heard a loud noise and saw people gathering around. So that one would actually probably be less important as far as our summary goes in this case, because it's not really a great vantage point. This one here says the blue car ran the red light and hit the truck passing through the green light. So I think this would be very interesting. Also, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth would be a very interesting thing to aggregate. And in both cases, I think it'd be interesting to point out, if not crucial to point out, for any claim made, okay, here are the 5 witnesses or the 10 experts who said the same thing, that you can go check their testimonies out. So that's the type of summary that I want, is something that still ties it back to the initial poster. And the way I'm looking at doing this is with what I'm calling boil downs. So what I'm thinking is, okay, it'd be cool to do a boil down for each of these different clusters, all the different items in the cluster, boil them down, do a summary, but still kind of, especially if it's important to, trace it back to the initial element. So in this, it'd be like the hymn and the Rig Veda. In this, it'd be the testimony of the person who witnessed the car crash. But the way that the boil down works is it would create a new PostgreSQL table. I could call it car crash BD for boil down. And then I want to give it the number of records to merge. So the analogy I like to use is March Madness. March Madness would be 2 records per merge, right? Because in most sports tournaments where the teams play each other, and if you lose, you're out. But sometimes that's a little bit too many merge operations. We might just want to, let's just take 10 at a time and merge them down. So just like before, what I'm thinking here is I could put, for example, statement. I think it was actually testimony. Testimony. So you can see how it's giving me 10 different testimonies here. But then I can also sign it here, the name of the person. I like this button here. It shows me the fields I have. So we can do name. Helps if I spell it. So now we have here John, Tom, Emma, Eve. And the idea is, let's also add here, so we can give it some detailed instructions, specific instructions to the use case. So I could say, also include in parentheses after each point, or after each claim, the names of the witnesses whose testimonies made this point. And let's try the new GPT-O model. Oh, I don't think I added to this computer yet. Let's try maybe one of these cheap ones on OpenRouter. It's almost overwhelming. There's like 100 different models to choose from. Let's see, what's a good one? Llama 3. Clearly I fell behind on this list of models on this computer. My other computer that I'm developing on has a lot more. Let's just do Claude 3 Sonnet, let's say. And we can try the prompt. Can't remember if this works at this stage. Okay. So I just like the ability to try this stuff out before I pull the trigger and have it run 1,000,000 times or thousands of times. So let's see what the summaries are here. The blue car ran the red light and hit the truck passing through the green light, said Tom, Emma, and Ashley. The blue car seemed to be speeding before the collision, says Emma and Ashley. The truck tried to swerve away at the last second, says John. The car appeared to lose control before hitting the truck, says Eve. There was a loud noise from the crash and people gathered around. Gerald, Buzz, Alex, and Sophia. After the collision, the driver of the car got out and seemed very upset, said Noah. The truck didn't seem to have its lights on, said Buzz. So I just see a lot of potential here for helping me boil down, as the name implies, huge data sets. Now, I think I might only actually have 10 testimonies in my spoofed data set here. So there's really no need or reason to run multiple rounds. Unlike in March Madness, where you have to keep playing these games because you're only eliminating one at each game, we boiled it down from 10 to 1 in one go. But let's say we had just 4. You'd have to do a couple different rounds of this. So I'm still working this through. I want to make it as seamless and streamlined as possible and helpful as possible. But this is the benefit of doing a database approach, which again, I'm just using PostgreSQL behind the scenes. Very amazing technology. PHP is a very amazing technology. JavaScript and jQuery, I can't recommend enough. And it's never been easier to use these techniques because you can just have ChatGPT do it for you. Ask it questions if you are hitting a wall. So the excuses should be running pretty thin. I get that, it's not for everybody. People like to just do what they like to do. But if you're serious about research or whatever you're trying to do, you might want to think in the back of your mind about the potential to use databases or make systems. I can also advise. If anybody has any questions, send me an email. We could also set up a call or something. I can help you out. Or just go chat with ChatGPT. That's probably what I'd recommend. Okay, but let me just so what I was thinking is it'd be cool, just like for the testimonies there, to boil down each of these different clusters. So each of these 8 different clusters, it'd be cool to see what's the summary. What do these have in common? And then I could say, well, let's make a video about these yellow ones. That's pretty cool. Or let's make a video about the blue one, etc. It'd be also interesting to see, okay, let's summarize the 8 cluster version, and let's summarize the 18 cluster version, because those are going to have subdivisions within the prior clusters. But what's interesting is you don't really get that much more benefit, even though there's 10 more clusters. So I definitely want to know what are these 8 clusters, because that's important. All right, so I really like that about the embedding. But my point is, you could use the batch 50% off deal to use OpenAI's embedding model, or you can just use Ollama and this thing called MXBAI Embed Large version 1. And according to what I've heard, this is like better than ChatGPT's embedding model. Maybe because ChatGPT is like doing some shenanigans with censorship or rigging the data or something. I don't know. Everything's also going to change into the future, which is why I'll be continuing to update people as to the latest and greatest. But according to this, if we go to the evals here, if we compare MXBAI Embed Large, its average is a 6468. Then there's classification, which I also have to look at. I'm still thinking, from what I've seen, BERT is like world class for text classification. But maybe there's some way to leverage these embedding models to do even better classification than BERT at some point. But here is OpenAI's Text Embedding 3 Large, scoring a little bit lower. I mean, they're on par, but the free versus whatever OpenAI is charging makes me want to use the MXBAI, especially because it's a third of the number of numbers in the list. For classification, it beats out OpenAI also. Clustering, it beats out OpenAI, which is what we were doing there, clustering. So definitely one to be on the lookout for. And it doesn't seem like they're done if they're calling this V1. All right, what else can we cover? So the OCR is amazing. So this is the 18th century handwriting, which it knocks out of the park. I also did my own little test here. See if I can find the source image. Sure I can. Basically, so there's something with whenever you're chatting with one of these bots, either through the well, you have to do it through the API, or you can do it through the so-called playground, which is the page I'm on here. There's something called a system prompt, which is a really powerful way to refine what the model does and how it acts. So the system prompt really dictates a lot of the behavior that you get, and then the user message is the first in the conversation. But the system prompt is very important, not to be overlooked. And so in this case, I said, you are an OCR AI who returns the exact text of the provided image. And here is the provided image. So one of these columns from a book that I've been parsing through and trying to get into a more usable format. Again, I want to get these into databases. I want to start doing merge operations, boil downs, summaries. And especially with the open source, well, not open source, out of copyright stuff. And a lot of topics that I find very interesting, such as history, psychology, etymology, linguistics, on and on. Some of the most important books are definitely out of copyright at this point. So one thing I'm trying to do is like bring this to the people, get it to the people. So this was like the test I did because it has some English in here. It's got some Greek. It's not the best quality in the world. Now what's interesting is this image here is like 3,000 pixels tall. 648 by 3320. So this was something that surprised me. I went to the calculator. I'm not sure if I can put any trust into this, but I went to the calculator for ChatGPT 4o, the Omni model. And it says 0.3 cents, or let's say 0.4 cents for the vision part. And then I'm guessing all the other tokens in terms of the text that it gives me back and the text that I give it, such as the system prompt and the user message. Those are going to be additional. But it could very likely come out to be less than, or around a cent, let's say, for each of those columns, which can add up pretty quick. But, you know, what's interesting is I used to, it's amazing how time's changing so fast. I would go to Amazon and buy some reprints of out of copyright books and just think it was such a great deal. Like, oh, I'll pay $30 for an old dictionary that I can't find anywhere else. Little did I know that I can actually find it on the internet now, thanks to Anna's Archive, and well, I'll just say Anna's Archive, an amazing site. annas-archive.org. And I have a Substack article about that if you want to read more, and a video that accompanies it. Just go to timtruth.com, and that has my Substack just right there. So my point is, though, that I was wondering, I was like, okay, maybe I can scale this down because I see here the number of 512 pixel tiles is what really dictates how many tokens it takes to represent the image. And tokens is what you get charged by. So I was like, okay, how much can I save by scaling it down? Is the quality the same? And then I played around with this and I'm like, okay, wow, this is weird. Even when I scaled this down, let me see if I can find those numbers I did. Is it this? Okay, so for example, I was thinking, okay, if I scale it down to 2046 pixels by 399, then it'd only be one tile wide in the 512 tile lingo, and 4 of those 512 pixel tiles tall. And so I plugged it in, and it's the exact same number when I scaled it down. I'll just show you here. So 399 width and a height of 2046. Same price. So that blew my mind because I'm like, okay, wow, I don't have to resize it. So if I'm reading this right, it just does this behind the scenes. And even when I tried it in this example that I'm about to show you, it's already doing what I was going to try next. And I was going to wonder, oh, can it maintain this high of quality? Well, apparently it does it all automatically, what I was about to have to do with my own development, custom development. So let's just play this through a little bit. This is a screenshot from yesterday. So this is the response that came back from GPT-4o. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise if it can do this. 18th century English cursive handwriting. That it can do typed Greek and English. It even got the accents and everything. I mean, this is amazing. And so another thing I want to do, I wish money wasn't as big of an issue as it is. I'm broke, but if I had to even a moderate budget, what I could do is cross-reference, for example, the abbreviations. So at the beginning of these etymology books and a lot of these reference books where they pack everything down into a format that looks like this, is they have, like, for example, Plut here, or Arist's pole, or Luke, Thuk. So it's like very cryptic until you realize that there's an abbreviation section, because they're trying to save on space, because it still is expensive to print stuff out into a book format. So I'm trying to remember which book this was. Probably can't find it at the moment. But let me just show you, for example, if you go to timtruth.com, right now it just redirects to my Substack. And thank you to all the people who support this channel. This is an article I penned last year around this time. And I just have an example. It's not even the best example. But the abbreviation section at the beginning is always interesting. Let's see what this one here. So this is an etymological dictionary of the Latin language. Let's find the abbreviations at the front. This one might not have it. Oh, here it is. No? That's weird. Okay, this one doesn't have it. Let's see what else. This one should have it. A New English Dictionary on Historical Principles. Just the first two letters of the alphabet, A and B. 1,200 pages here. I have so much reference material I want to get through, but it's like the attention to detail these people used to pay. It's amazing how far we've fallen in some respects. Okay, so here are the abbreviations for this book. Let's see if we can find, like, what was it? Luke. I mean, this is a different book, but we might see some similarities. So, like, Lith is Lithuanian. LXX is the Septuagint. ENT is in etymology. Or, excuse me, in entomology. ON is Old Norse, which is very important. If you don't know that, if you're just like, what is on? Oh, Old Norse. That's a big, important distinction. OS is Old Saxon, for example. So my point is, and long story short, is I'm daydreaming here about decrypting these entries as far as turning all the abbreviations into a more readable format. So there's different transformations that we can do to all these open source, or I should say out of copyright books. But here's just the text of what I was able to extract from this image, which got scaled down apparently to make it more reasonable as far as pricing, which I'm thankful for. But I just think this is really cool. And another thing here is if you see, you can see, what is this? On tion, comma, means equal pose or compensation. But then they have these other endings here. And so if you don't know what that means, it's like, what is this? What are they talking about? But I believe in this case, it'd be like talking this atos would just give you this other word here. So from this last vowel, it's saying, okay, this is a different, very similar word that has a slightly different ending as far as the suffix goes. So if we go to, say, ChatGPT, Control K, what does this mean in Greek? It says it's not a standard word, so I might have made a mistake. Anti means against or opposite. Sekoma, oh, I'm definitely butchered that up. Sekoma, because that's sigma, comes from sekos, which means pen or fold. It might mean something like against the enclosure or opposite the pen. So just an example there of trying to decipher these old books. Speaking of old books, I wanted to finish up this thought here. I was just showing how to use Anna's archive to get a bunch of great stuff. So this is my process. I open up a bunch of interesting books into tabs. You can see across the top, all those are Anna's archive tabs for these different books. Like here's History of England by David Hume. So I just open these all up, and then I start going through tab by tab. Increase the speed here. And there's one problem with Anna's archive. Well, yeah, it's kind of a problem. I see why they do it, because they're trying to get funding. If you become a member, you get the fast downloads, and you also don't get, you don't have to wait. Sometimes you have to wait a little bit if you're downloading a lot off their slow download servers, which is a little bit unfortunate, but you can still make do. You just have to kind of do it in spurts, and you let it cool down once it tells you there's too many from the, I'll show you here. So what I always start by doing is, see this little button here, show external downloads. So if you have a book that you found and you're trying to download it, start by clicking this button here, show external downloads, and look for something like libgen.li or I forgot what the other one is. There's two that are pretty clutch. Also, I do kind of feel bad, and I want to be specific here. Sometimes, like I'm really good at the internet. Like I don't fall for phishing. I don't fall for, I know what to do with like pop-up windows when they come up and not to fall for it. But there are some pretty annoying pop-ups that I feel bad because like people like my grandmother might fall prey to them if it's like you need to update your software. And it's really just them trying to get you to click on something and download something and run it on your computer. Not that it's Anna's archive that does it, but I'll show you the one site that you have to be a little bit wary of. Just don't fall for pop-ups on the internet and stuff. I wish people were better about not doing those types of ads. But so what I do, okay, so here's an example. If you click external downloads, you can see here libgen.rs and libgen.li. These are two that are really good websites. And I usually will go to those first if there are external downloads, because if you download from the external downloads, then you're not using up your slow downloads. And the downloads are quicker. So I prioritize using the external downloads, but a lot of times you'll have to use the slow downloads. So this is library.lol, which is one of the external downloads. This is a great site. You just click get at the top. The problem though is it's really limiting. So after just a couple of downloads, it'll say basically that you're capped and you have to wait a little bit. Not the end of the world, but it's a really fast download. So I always check external downloads. This is a good site here, libgen.li. The problem is, though, that almost every time you click get at the top, it's going to open in a new tab. You're going to see it here in a second. I closed it really quick. I just have basically my fingers over Control W, ready to click it if it opens up a new tab. Control W closes the current tab. You can also, if you're up here, you can also middle mouse click the tab, it'll close it. Or just try to find the little X. But the middle mouse click is a great way to close. And then come back here and click get again. It'll usually be pretty obvious if it underlines it. It's going to give you the file. Otherwise, it's going to open a pop-up. But there's an amazing collection of books. Like Anna's Archive has, you can see there, 31.6 million books. Now, a lot of these are in copyright. So Anna's Archive is like being gunned down because they don't really respect copyright. They look at themselves as it says here, the largest truly open library in human history. So just to be clear, I'm not promoting downloading copyrighted material. That's up to you. Be careful. Understand the ethical problems, pros and cons, and everything. But they do have a lot of copyright protected. I mean, it's not really protected, but a lot of stuff that's still in copyright, let's say. So I just wanted to show here the process by which I've downloaded so much stuff off this website. So whenever there's external downloads, I always go with those. But I'll show you here what happens when you hit the usage cap. So that opened a pop-up. I closed the pop-up. There again, it opened a pop-up. I closed it out. Just have your fingers over Control W. Kill it off before it even loads. So this is a short little clip here. I just wanted to show the last bit where it caps me off, and then what I do is just walk away or go work on something else, and then I come back and see if I can download some more. It's not a huge impediment. It's an amazing resource, really. And then there's Sci-Hub. So now I'm going through, after I went through every single external link I could find. I always prioritize the external links. And then I use the slow download servers because I'm not a member yet. And I just click download, download, download. And this is important to point out too. It takes some time. You can see these are all chugging along thinking. And sometimes it'll refresh. It'll be like, okay, no longer loading. You'll see that it downloads a file. And then I just close out of that because I got the file successfully, or I'm working on downloading it. The alternative is sometimes it will do this. See, too many downloads at the same time from the same IP address. So then what I do is I just right click on the arrow here. I go back to the original page. And I just kind of leave it there as a kind of a bookmark that I still need to download that. So I just wanted to show the ins and the outs of how to use Anna's Archive. There's also Sci-Hub, which is an amazing tool. So let's say let's see if we can find an old out of copyright study here. See, anything before 1900? Let's just ask something here. What's a classic? Let's see, like the Skinner box. What is the original Skinner box paper called? The Behavior of Organisms, an Experimental Analysis, 1938. So it's probably still in copyright, but it's really old and seminal, evil, albeit. So what I would do is I'd come over here. What we're looking for is the DOI, which is like the unique ID that we can, let's see. Okay, right here. So this is the DOI. If we just copy the DOI and we go to Sci-Hub, sci-hub.se, paste the reference, click open. Oh, they don't have it. Let's see if Anna's archive has it under their SciDB. Nope. I'm pretty sure I have that somewhere on my computer, but it's not really the point. The point is, if you're ever trying to find a paper, and it's a really important paper, like a lot of times if I'm looking for an ivermectin paper to show people it's a toxic poison, I will resort to using Sci-Hub because I think it's crucial public information, or it's information that's crucially important to the public, I should say. And there's so many papers on here. And on Anna's archive, they boast of, I think, like 100 million. What? Let's see. 100 million papers. So I think it's important for us to really delve into the scientific literature, the book archive, and really store as much off, siphon as much out, and store it off as we can. I'm currently going through some huge archival efforts, doing a lot of scientific research into these poisons that are being pushed, trying to use the dark psychology of like, oh, well, you can live longer. You've got these terrible, scary things inside of you. Oh, you better take this poison. You'll live longer, right? Like weaponizing all these human drives, the drive for safety, the drive for longevity, to have more time with their family, to provide for their family. It's really sick. But yeah, I don't want to go on too long here. Are there any questions in the chat? If not, we'll start wrapping up. Just Say N says, is Omni the same as 4.0? No, it seems to be different. I think it's probably a smaller model, actually. But it performs really above its weight, especially given the half price versus GPT-4. And I also like, going back to this here, I like that we now have, in addition to 40 messages every 3 hours on GPT-4, another 80 messages for every 3 hours on GPT-4o. So it's much harder to hit the wall at this point because you can always just go between the two. So I think maybe I don't know, they have some tricks up their sleeves as far as their GPT-4o. Even though it's a smaller model, it actually seems to really do some tasks very well. I just don't know exactly which tasks are best for each. I saw some analysis that for like long text, GPT-4 is still better. And for more, it sounds like they're kind of advertising it as being for more complex tasks. GPT-4 is better, but GPT-4o is interesting because it's, I believe, multimodal, although they've only really started rolling out text. But you've probably seen the demos where they are talking to it on their phone, and there's like this really lifelike voice that it has. And that's a game changer. Let's see what else. All is Mind says, ask AI what's the most occulted knowledge. Ask it what is the most recent thing it learned. I'll leave that up to you. See, those are the types of questions that I just don't think I really trust it, because it's in on the occulting game. And I don't think AI is the end all be all. That's something I really want to hammer home. People are probably going to be like, oh, look, Tim is promoting AI. No, I'm just saying it's another research tool that we have. And there's a lot that I've seen that's like really amazing. Like I write a lot of code and it can save me a lot of time doing grunt work for writing code. And so that just means less grunt work that I have to do. So until it stops being a huge boon in that respect, or if I find some reason why I don't want to do it, I'll continue to do it. And so will everybody else who thinks like me. So it's important to understand from a defensive perspective and also from just understanding how the world works, how people are getting their information, the tools that we have at our disposal. Let's see, any other questions? Shout out to everybody for stopping by. I really appreciate you. And again, check out timtruth.com. That's my Substack. I have the code for training your own BERT model and a ton of other research looking into things that you don't hear anybody talk about it for some reason, even though I think they're like the most important stories in the world. These alternative poison cult poisons that are being pushed. The PGP angle, I think, is huge. Like, nobody's talking about permeability glycoprotein. And I think it should just be, it's kind of slapping me in the face just how important it is. And like, nobody's even willing to look at it. It's like the most pivotal thing I've ever come across in terms of like how obvious it is when you look at the scientific studies and how consequential it is because of all these things that people are taking that are going to be much higher absorption, aka it's going to act like a much higher dose if somebody is inhibiting their PGP. But this is a really important thing that I published onto Substack. It's my BERT training code, which is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. I try to make it as general as possible so that you can just have whatever spreadsheet you want and then train a model and then use it for whatever other data you have. And it uses Python, and it's really easy if you have ChatGPT to take it to the next level and to help you write a script that'll say, if you have say you have the training model and then you have some other huge data set and you just need something to help you iterate through each item, run it through the model, make a prediction, and do something with it, ChatGPT can really knock that out easily. And so check that out. It's all kind of built into just a few key classes, such as this one here, text classifier model trainer.py. And there's another one called classifier data streamer, which helps chunk up and process the CSV to your specs. So I try to make it as easy to use as possible. If you want to support the show, keep this work alive, I could really help. I could really use your help. So you can benefit from that code there and keep the show running, all just by signing up at timtruth.com. So thank you all. I hope you all have a great rest of your night, is what I'm trying to say. And you all rock. Thank you so much. Take care.